Okay, we have already worked on what test means. We have defined what test is, and then we've also understood the classification of tests. Now, classification was done on the basis of conduction, was done on the basis of objective, was done on basis of time, and many other points we have already covered in class. Now we're moving ahead to actually developing a test. So while we decide to develop a test, the first thing that we need to do, even before anything else, is to take a decision on which variable are we going to develop a test. So the variable or variables that we want to assess are decided by us based on the need that is there, and also based on our knowledge of that variable or variables, and also the existing scales that are prevalent already and standardized scales that are there to measure that variable. So if I identify that I want to develop a test of attitude towards religion, now before I go ahead with developing a test, one thing which is of foremost importance is that I should know what attitude means. I should have a very deep understanding of these concepts such as attitude and religion, and together both. All right. Once I decide that I want to develop a scale on attitude towards religion, then I start to develop a operational definition of the variables that I'll be measuring. Now, what is an operational definition? An operational definition means that after doing my thorough research, my thorough learning about what are the researches about attitude towards religion, what are the different researches in context of, let's say, India, if I'm wanting to develop a test which is for Indian population. So I need to know what has been happening, what it is. So operational definition is basically a definition that a author develops based on thorough understanding of that variable, and that operational definition is also going to be reflected in the items. So it's basically a deep understanding of the concepts of the variables that will be covered under a test. So now once I've decided that I want to develop a test of on attitude towards religion, and I have a deep understanding of the concept, and I develop a operational definition, then I go ahead with something called item writing. So now we will do item writing in a little more detail. Now item writing, when we're doing, we'll outline the steps that are taken for developing test items, and we'll also discuss the different items formats such as dichotomous, polycotomous, Likert scale, checklist, q sort, and the category scales, etc., and their disadvantages and advantages. So going ahead with item development. So items, what are items? Items are specific questions or problems that make up a test. Okay, so we understand we've been using this word since probably the first day in our class of experiments and practicals. So items are specific questions or problems that make up a test. This definition was given by Kaplan in 2009. So an item is a specific stimulus to which a person responds overtly. That is, that it can be observed, okay, and can be scored. So all the statements that are there that when you are doing any test, all the statements, be it in a form of a question or just a statement, that are part of a test, they are called items. So when I say that this is an item, there are three things that it should have. One is that a person or respondent should be able to respond overtly. That means that response is something that can be noted down by the tester. Okay, and also that response can be scored. Now this response can be scored or evaluated, for example, on a scale or grade. Example, 75%, meaning out of a 10 item test, the individual has scored 75 items correct. Okay, so it should be scoreable also. So a test is a measurement device or a technique used to quantify behavior or help in understanding and prediction of behavior. It is also termed as collection of items. So in a very raw manner, we can say what is a test. It's a collection of items which is aimed at quantifying a certain type of behavior, which is aimed at quantifying a variable, a psychological variable in this regard. Okay, so when we say quantifiable, that means understand, predict, measure, compare, etc. So test is used for all these things, but what it is, it's a compilation or a collection of items. Now item writing involves a number of steps. So the first step that we'll talk about is defining clearly what you want to measure. So most often it will be one of these examples that we'll talk about, that a type of cognitive achievement, this can either be a skill or a knowledge. For example, knowledge of Indian history, or for a skill demonstration of an ability to multiply decimal. Now what are we saying? So we need to define clearly what we want to measure. Do we want to measure cognitive achievement, or what do we want to measure? Another example is a type of affective trait, for example, interest in psychology. So do we want to measure a type of affective trait? So the item should be made as specific as possible. We need to know, if I want to measure, for example, if I want to measure attitude towards religion, so what am I measuring? Am I measuring positive attitude or negative attitude, or am I measuring just the presence of having an attitude towards religion? Basically that has to do with the awareness about the religion. So I have to be very, the first step for writing an item would be that the definition of what I want to measure should be very clear. Second is that we start to generate an item pool. We start to generate an item pool. Now, the item developer or the author should take care in selecting and developing items, and they should avoid redundant items. So, when we say pool, obviously, this has been discussed a lot in the class, that in order to get the required number of item, one may need to write 3-4 items for each item that they wish to write. What does that mean? That if I want to develop a test which has 20 items, I should generate a pool of 60 to 80 items. Sounds a lot, but that's the amount of labor that goes behind developing a test. So you have to develop around 3 times or 4 times of the number of items that you tentatively are going to have in your final test. Now, third thing for item writing that is important is to avoid exceptionally long items. So, writing exceptionally long items will lead to having items that are misleading or confusing. So, that should be avoided. Okay, so the item should not be written in such a, so an item which is 3-line statement with no full stop. So, it will confuse the respondent. So, it should be avoided. Shorter, simpler language should be used. Now, the fourth thing that we need to do in an item writing is keep the level of reading difficulty appropriate for those who will complete the scale. That is, it is important to be mindful of the level of reading difficulty of the target test taker. For example, the item developer is writing for nursery school children. The item should be in line with the capacity of the target test taker. If this is not done, then there will be no point in developing it. So you have to keep the level of reading difficulty appropriate for those on whom this test will be conducted. You need to be very clear about their, let's say their IQ. That's what we mean. So if you're developing a test for example, if 16 PF or HSPQ, which is high school personality questionnaire, is for the students who are below 16. So the item's difficulty language should be such. If I'm developing an item for rural population, the difficulty of item should be such. Our next fifth step is to avoid double-barreled item that convey 2 or more ideas at the same time. A double-barreled item may end up confusing the test taker, since they may fail to decide whether to agree or disagree with the statement. This will eventually affect the result. So, for example, if we want to, we're giving a statement and we want to see if you agree or disagree with the statement. So I vote NRM because I support universal secondary education. So these are two different statements. I vote NRM and I support universal secondary education. So someone can agree with both, but some can agree with one. So you can't have a double-barreled item which is asking kind of two same things, and in that too in a same statement, in the same item. Now, the sixth thing that we need to understand, we need to keep in consideration while writing items, sixth thing is to consider mixing positively and negatively worded items. At times, the test takers they may develop the acquaintance response set, where they tend to respond positively to all items, and they avoid this bias. You may so we can include items that are worded in opposite direction. For example, uh, a single test can comprise of items such as I feel tired, and the other item can be I feel energized. So if I answer I feel tired, yes, and I feel energized, yes, now these are two contradictory responses. So to avoid this, so some people are just doing a test out of habit and not paying attention. So you should have a mix of positively worded and negatively worded answers, responses, items, so that the person is very careful while responding, and carefully responds. So seventh thing that is important is when writing test items, we need to be sensitive to the cultural and ethnic differences. For example, if we are writing an item for a religious population, it may not be appropriate to write items reflecting mannerisms that may be offensive to them. Okay, the eighth thing that is of very great importance is to realize that the item they become obsolete. When they become obsolete, they lose reliability. That is when items are used over a long period of time, they tend to lose reliability, and hence the need to ensure that their reliability at any point in time if they are to be used. So you need to be so it's important to realize if the item has become obsolete or not. uh, there are some general other guidelines for writing an item other than these eight that we have discussed. One is all of the above should not be an answer. These are only suggestive things that we are mentioning here for item writing. So all of the above should not be an answer option. None of the above should not be an answer option. We're talking about a psychological test. All answer options should be credible. Order of answer options should be logical or vary. It should vary. Item should cover important concepts and objectives. Negative wording should not be used all the time. Options should include only one correct answer. Okay, they should not have two answers and confuse people. Specific determiners, example, always, never, should be avoided. Answer options should be homogeneous so that not to confuse responders. So if you're using a Likert scale, so it starts with strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, and strongly agree. So you need to be having a kind of a simpler this specific homogeneity in answering. Then correct answer option should not be the longest answer option. This is another thing because it might become monotonous, and there are a lot of other attention related things that might lead the individual not to respond the correct answer. So items should be independent of each other. Test copy should be clear, readable, and not handwritten all the time. Okay. These are some of the things to keep in mind while we are developing while we are writing a item set for a test.